Hey everyone, this is Mr. Franzen. Bishop Brossard High School's Seek and Find Ministry is a ministry aimed to seek students where they are in their faith and help them find Jesus in their life. We do this by providing faith-based media content and learning opportunities to help students deepen their faith. Right now, we are in the middle of releasing episodes of our series recapping the TV show, The Chosen. I recommend watching the season of The Chosen first, and then come back and enjoy the recap episodes. Now let's go ahead and get to the next episode. Thanks for listening. What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to the Bishop Brossard High School Seek and Find podcast. I don't know if I've been as excited to record an episode of this as I am right now, but we have a very special episode of The Chosen recap that we are doing today. So we have finished seasons 1 and 2. Hopefully you've listened to all those, but we are starting season 3 right now. But I don't have Mrs. Hensley with me. I don't have Mr. Zengel with me. I don't have Coach Hensley with me. I have 10 very nervous but excited students from Campus Ministry class. So welcome, everybody. Yay, cheers. So first thing I want to do is we're going to pass the mics around the room. So just so everybody's aware, I've got 4 mics here and we've got 11 people. So there might be a little bit of passing of the mics back and forth just so people are in the know of how we're recording this. But I first want to introduce all the students that are here with us. So we're going to start to my left here with Sophia. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sophia McGrath.
I'm Leah Rushman.
I'm Paige Shirley.
I'm Tessa Heim.
I'm Amber Keeney.
I'm Caitlin Kramer.
I'm Emma Laker.
I'm Lexi Braun.
I'm Addison Doman.
I'm Emma Orth.
Awesome. So that is who is going to be joining me. Now, you are going to have to do your best to figure out who's talking based on the rest of the episode, but that's fine. So first of all, the way this is going to work, I'm going to summarize to the best of my ability what happened in episode 1 of season 3, and then at that point we'll have opportunities for students to jump in and discuss what they thought of the episode. So just to remind people of what happened at the end of season 2 ended with Jesus was in the middle of his Sermon on the Mount, and we start season 3 with a little bit of a flashback at first. And the flashback starts with Matthew, and it's still in AD. It's in AD 24. And the flashback is of the moment when Matthew and his father parted ways. His father was disappointed in him because he chose to leave his Jewish tradition and work for the Romans. And Matthew actually had sent a soldier to his parents' house to collect taxes, which is kind of a strange, difficult situation to be in. But at the same time, Matthew is kind of stuck between doing his job and being a loyal son, and he is struggling with that. So that's the moment his father basically tells him he's no longer his son. And so we see how that affects Matthew here, as well as how it'll come into play at the end of the episode. After that scene, we return to the present time of the story, and that is Jesus still being in the middle of his Sermon on the Mount. We don't get the whole Sermon on the Mount, but we do get bits and pieces of the Sermon on the Mount. Particularly, there's a lot of focus on emphasizing the parts about being anxious and not focusing on the things that worry us. One of the things he said, your heavenly Father knows you need things. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all the things that you're worried about will be taken care of. We get a little brief moment between Atticus and Gaius, and for those who don't remember, Atticus is like this secret spy kind of guy who works for the Roman government, and he has been observing the Sermon on the Mount so that he can report back to Quintus. Gaius was Matthew's protector who works for the Roman government, but he is very confused in this moment why Matthew chose to leave, and he clearly is just speechless after hearing Jesus talk. That's all you get from those two. Matthew is extremely fired up following the Sermon on the Mount, and he's trying to talk to Jesus about it, but Jesus is worn out and says, Matthew, can we debrief on this later? But thanks him for everything that has happened. We get to so at the very end of season 2, we got introduced to Judas. Now, obviously, for anybody who knows Scripture, Judas is a very interesting character. He's a very controversial character who ultimately betrays Jesus in the end. So anytime there's an interaction with Jesus and Judas, that's always in the back of your head. And so they speak. Jesus asked Judas if he's ready to do hard things. Judas says he is, and Jesus says, we'll see. So I'm sure we'll come back and talk about that moment. And then at this point, the episode is called Homecoming, if I didn't mention that already. At this point, everybody's kind of going their separate ways, and it looks like they are trying to, I guess, rejuvenate reunite with family and friends who they haven't seen in a while. Before they do that, though, we get introduced again to Joanna, who has been a minor character to this point. But Joanna shows up, and she knows John the Baptizer because John the Baptist is locked away in the prison where she is from. And Andrew, who's good friends with John the Baptist, interjects and is asking her and Jesus if he can go see John the Baptist, and Jesus allows it. I don't need to mention that. We get a little bit of info between Thomas and Rhema. Thomas, of course, is one of the apostles. Rhema is not a biblical character, but she's used in this series in a really powerful way. You can tell that they're kind of smitten for each other and starting to fall in love, so that is that part of the story expanding. We meet 2 important characters in the show, but they aren't necessarily biblical either, and that's Yusuf and Jairus. They are 2 people who are sort of infatuated with what Jesus has to say, yet in their positions working for the Sanhedrin and the Jewish community, they don't know how much they're allowed to talk about it, but they sort of discover that talking to each other is a safe place. And Yusuf is documenting some things that Jesus said. Jairus is going to put it away in a safe to protect that information. This is going to be very important for later in the season. I don't know how much any of you have actually seen later episodes of the season, but that moment's going to be important. So as far as the homecoming theme, you've got Simon and his wife Eden who are reuniting, but unfortunately, Z and Nathaniel barge into their home and decide they need a place to stay. James and John reunite with their parents, Zebedee, and I can't remember their mom's name. Thomas is staying with them. You have neat interactions between Mary Magdalene, Rhema, and Tamar, who are the other 2 women that are going to stay with her. And there's this really interesting moment where Matthew doesn't know where to go. He's kind of always the awkward, lost puppy dog face that everybody's sympathetic for, but at the same time, Matthew's got to learn to grow and figure out how to, I guess, become faithful again, because that's something he abandoned when he was younger. And then probably the best scene, in my opinion, is what it comes close to closing with, and that is when Andrew and Joanna visit John the Baptist, and that conversation is something we'll talk about. I don't want to get into that too much now. And then we close with Andrew apologizing to Mary Magdalene. We'll talk about that if you have questions about that. And then Matthew returns home, and we'll talk about that moment as well. So that is like 5 full minutes of a summary of what happened in season 1. So before I speak about anything, I'm going to give students an opportunity to just generally share some of their notes, some of the things that they want to highlight, so that I don't steal all of their thoughts and they just get on here and say, what Mr. Franzen said. So without further ado, I'm going to open up the floor. Anything at all from the episode that stood out to you, feel free to grab the mic and jump in and talk about it.
So I had a lot about like the interaction with John the Baptist when Andrew and Joanna went to see him. And when they like first showed them going down to the prison, like the prison was so like rotten and ugly looking. And I know Mr. Galler kind of touched on this in like our religion classes, but one of like the main keys to like believing in the faith is just seeing all these people who like suffered and went through horrible like conditions just out of their faith for God. And the fact that he was so happy living in that like prison is something that's kind of inspiring, because like the faith keeps you positive in dark times. And I think John the Baptist is a really good example of that.
Awesome. I agree with everything you just said. Who'd like to go next?
I wrote down a specific quote from that scene, and it was, "This prison is nothing now that he is here." And it was John talking about Jesus to Andrew when Andrew was really worried about John and where he was in the jail, and how we previously mentioned how disgusting the jail was. And he just thought that it wasn't the place for John the Baptist to be. But John was in high spirits the whole time, and he even mentions that he thinks that the prison that he's in, which is obviously a high security prison because the wife of the person who owns it has to bribe the guard to get into it, he says that the prison is nothing now that Jesus is here, which is just a very powerful sentence, I think.
Awesome. Thanks, Leah. Who would like to go next?
I had something on like Matthew in the beginning of the episode, and his father was like, you have to trust in God and lean not on your own understandings. And I feel like Matthew took the job as a tax collector because he had anxiety about the future, and being a tax collector provided him a stable life, so he didn't have to worry. So he leaned on his own understandings. He didn't trust in God. And his father like disowned him, and he kind of went away from his faith. But I feel like he's starting to develop trusting in God because he quit his job, so he's not leaning on his own understandings anymore.
I kind of liked Caitlin's point because like it correlates back to what Jesus was saying in the beginning about anxiety and like his Sermon on the Mount.
Awesome.
At the beginning, at his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Where your treasures are is where your heart will be as well." And I just think that's powerful, especially now, because sometimes I get like distracted and I say I'm like on my walk with Jesus, but my actions or things that I value or materialistic things like or trends kind of get in my way as a distraction. And if my heart was really with Jesus, I wouldn't be so distracted by those things.
For the sophomores listening, that's the exact thing we talked about in class yesterday. We read the parable or the story of the rich young man who was unwilling to sell all of his things and follow Jesus. Sometimes for us that can be material things. It can be just we get so wrapped into what we have to do in this world, which is understandable because that's the world we're living in. But at the same time, the more we can think eternally, it can paint a bigger picture for us. Who would like to speak next?
I can go. I think that this kind of relates back to what Sophia and Leah said, but I think just like how emotional Andrew and John like got when they were talking just like shows like how true their friendship is. And then also something that John said that really stuck out to me was there is something for you and something for what you're going through.
So he was referring to the Sermon on the Mount there, right? And John was getting him to focus in because I'm sure this is the case for many of you in class as well. When your teachers are talking, sometimes they're going to speak about things that relate to you. Sometimes it's going to be stuff that doesn't relate to you. But every time you go to Mass, you can find something that's trying to speak to you, whether it's a person you meet at Mass, whether it's something the priest said, whether it's a reading, whether it's a certain prayer, whether it's the music, like something is trying to speak to you. It might be one line, it might be one thing from that entire episode, or that entire service. But that requires effort on your part to listen. I think that's the hard part. And I think that's what John was trying to convince Andrew to do. It's like, dude, pay attention, open up your ears and figure out what he's trying to say to you. And when he actually focused in on that, he was like, I got it figured out. Thank you.
I had a quote from Jairus when he was talking about his wife and his daughter meeting new people and making friends. It said being isolated makes us closer, and that kind of relates back to like being at church. Like you're isolated with Christ and you're putting the materialistic things away, like Tessa was saying, and you're really just like focusing on like your relationship with Jesus, and you're focusing on how to build your faith and how to relate it back to you when putting aside like all of the distractions. So like being isolated with the Lord, like it can make you closer and it can build your faith like a lot more than being like than a religion class can. Like it takes effort more on your part than it does in the like guided stuff.
I agree. For me, I think when I was in my religion class, I probably took it for granted that I got reminded every day about the faith, and so much so that it's like routine and you don't really truly slow down and think about it until you're kind of forced to. And for me, I was forced to apply it, I think, more once I got to college because I was more free. I didn't have my parents dragging me to church. It was on me to do it. And so I think... So anyways, I think it's just a reminder. It's a daily reminder, but we don't want to take it for granted. We don't want to take it for granted. And it's easy when we get away from it and get in a routine that is away from it. So like we can go from school to home to do homework, to practice, to doing more homework, to going to bed, and doing that every day. But if we don't even slow down for a moment at any point, whether it's in religion class, whether it's on your own, whether it's on the bus ride, whether it's in your car, any moment to at least take a few moments to think about our faith and how we're allowing it to work in our lives, I think that's the main message John the Baptist is trying to say. He's like, you're all looking at the world the wrong way. So let's keep talking about John the Baptist for a moment, okay? Notice who's behind bars. It's John the Baptist. Who's the least scared person in the prison? It's John the Baptist. He does not care. So for those who haven't paid that close attention to the first 2 seasons, John the Baptist has kind of been nicknamed by Simon Peter as Creepy John. And I love Simon Peter. He's probably, for me, the most relatable character that I can think of for me. And I think that's a perfect way to describe John because he does come across as creepy. Like, this guy's locked behind bars. His hair's matted. He's dirty. He's obviously hasn't had a chance to, take care of himself. He's been too worried about preaching about Jesus to people, which is awesome, but he's fearless. And I think that's a part that I'm envious of. I don't know about you guys. In front of students, I'm super, super comfortable. That's a testament to you all. I'm comfortable talking about this stuff with you all. Sometimes I get in front of adults and the fears kick in and I'm less willing to talk about it with people. Strangely enough, talking into a mic and blasting it out on the internet for the entire world to see doesn't scare me. But in person, if I encounter somebody who I know is not into their faith at all, it's a little harder for me to voice my opinion. And I know those fears exist among high school kids, not just with faith, but with anything. So when you think about what John is trying to say, he says, once again, I forget who said it, but somebody in here said it, but don't be afraid. This prison is nothing now that he is here. And all those things he said, something specifically was for you. And of course, Andrew noticed that it was all about the stuff that was about being anxious. If you want to, and what Andrew keeps saying is, John, how can I help you? And John's like, dude, I'm fine. Like, they can kill me and it's not going to change anything about where I'm going. He's that confident. And so that's when he tells him, if you want to help me, then listen to him. So I guess my question to you is, in all of those little montages of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, was there anything that stood out to you all? Go ahead, Lexi.
One of the biggest things for me was he said, which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to a span of life? And I think that just kind of shows that, like, really, like, being anxious, obviously that's something that's natural, but we can turn to God to help us with our anxiousness, because being anxious and worrying about things isn't going to change the plan that he has for us. And like, no matter what, like, he's going to keep us safe. He's going to have a plan for us. And so spending a lot of our energy worrying about it is just going to cause us to grow further apart from God.
So I think what Lexi was talking about there is a good thing. It's good to recognize that, but it's very hard in the moment to put it to practice, right? Because when you're in the midst of the anxiety, you're in the midst of the worry, it's hard to say, God's really watching out for me in the moment. So the more you can trust him, it requires you to have a relationship with him. Like, trust is built with time. So you got to spend time with him. All right, Amory had something to add on to there.
I also had that quote, but also I think it's a way that it can also be for God to, like, kind of turn your focus back on him, like testing you, like, to get your focus back to him, to be able to make it through the hard times and knowing that he's there, and that can be part of the plan for you. like it can always be different, and it can always be like sometimes it can be easy when it's guided, and sometimes it can be harder when you have to like kind of really push for it. I thought that was interesting.
Awesome. Thank you.
I wrote down like turning the other cheek, which like I know is something that I personally struggle with, like because if someone does something like make me mad, I want to like get back at them, but Jesus says like turn the other cheek, and I really found that interesting just because we live in such like a society that's like retaliation and stuff. So I think it's something like that we can definitely work on, and like turn the other cheek, like God wouldn't turn to him and pray for like the other person, because like if they're being mean to you, like obviously like they might be going through something, so like you can pray for them and pray for yourself, like to not like get back at them.
Yeah, one of the hardest things in the Sermon on the Mount is when he talks about loving your enemies. I think Joanna even brings it up to John the Baptist in the prison, and she's like, he said some really wild things like love your enemies. Are you kidding me? Like, that's not exactly how Joanna said it, but that has to challenge everybody. Okay, do you have something to add? Oh shoot, I'm sorry, I need to shut up sometimes. Does somebody have something to add before I wind up taking somebody else's?
I just kind of want to mention something as like the chosen in general, and I just like how like humanizing everyone is, especially like when they were like having like the little fiasco with like Simon Peter just wanting time alone with his wife, and then everybody like coming in and just like barging in. Like that was like a relatable moment. Like sometimes you just want to be alone, and then there's a bunch of people coming at you. Like these people aren't perfect, they're people. And I think that's what makes The Chosen like such a popular series about Jesus and like gets people to Jesus, is because it's like not like a lot of times it depicts like the apostles and Jesus as like above everyone else and so holy and so perfect, and like you can never be these people, but they're just people.
Peter fails time and time again, which is maybe why I like Peter a lot, because I know I fail time and time again, but then I also feel like I have moments where I do good, and Peter has those moments too, so that's why I like it. That's a great point. No? Okay. One of the other things that I wrote down as an observation here that I want to mention is when Jesus is talking in the Sermon on the Mount, when you just look at the eyes and ears and the expressions on people's faces, they are very intently listening. I don't know if that's the case when we go to church or service anywhere on Sundays or even in class, right? We're not intently listening. We're fulfilling our obligations. I say we, I'm not speaking for everybody. Maybe sometimes I am not doing a good job listening intently. But why do you think now I know it's Jesus in the flesh, but why do you think it was so life-altering for people there, but for us, it's a lot harder to engage that kind of listening?
I think it's because for us, we hear the same readings every 3 years, and they just kind of get recycled over and over, where when this is happening on the Sermon on the Mount and all of the other times that Jesus is talking to these people, it's the first time that they've heard all of this stuff, and all of it's pretty controversial, because in the Old Testament and the books that they had already known from heart, it's all completely different. The entire Sermon on the Mount goes back on a lot of things that it says in the Old Testament, which people thought was really crazy at the time, but now it's just things that we hear over and over. So it's almost easier now not to pay attention, because if we've heard it once, we've heard it 100 times, and it almost seems like that.
That's a great point. I think we're kind of flipped now. Back then, they kind of knew the Old Testament super well. That was their word of God. That's what they knew. Where now we probably know the New Testament pretty well, but we don't even really think about the Old Testament. We're just like, because it's kind of hard to read, honestly. Some parts of it are very difficult to read. I listen to a lot of, I've listened to the whole thing, but Father Mike's Bible in a Year. There are some weeks where he might be going through the book of Leviticus, for example, where it's just really hard. Now, Father Mike does an amazing job of making it interesting and looking at why it's important then and now. But if I was just reading that on my own, oh my gosh, I'd be like, what am I reading? This is very difficult. But the New Testament for us is just super relatable, especially if you're trying to get used to building a relationship with God, or Jesus particularly.
And I think it's like it catches people's attention because it's new and it's like exciting and it's like the unknown, and it goes back to the trusting in God and leaning not on your own understandings, because they don't understand, but they seek to understand and to see what the unknown is all about. So taking a leap of faith and jumping into the unknown, you'll either land or you'll learn how to fly. So I feel like it's something exciting and new, and everyone wants to see what it's all about.
That's a good point. One of the things Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that we hear too, he talks about the birds in the air, and he says, if God's taking care of them, know that how much more he's going to take care of you. So it's reiterating what we know in Genesis, is that we are unique compared to every other living thing on this earth. We are the ones created in his image and likeness, and he's trying to remind us of that. I had another thought that you spurred, and I just forgot it. That's all right. If I'm supposed to say it, it'll come back to me. Did you have something, Lexi?
I think another thing too is just the fact that it's like his ideas were so like wild, like it's so controversial and stuff, and it's like even if the people there weren't agreeing with what he was saying, they just wanted to go just to hear what he had to say, because it was like, what is this crazy man like saying crazy things? And also it wasn't like they could like record it and like post it for everybody to see. It's like you had to be there to like hear what he was saying. So I think part of it was also just like, this crazy man is like saying all these new weird ideas, and it's like against everything we've ever heard before. So I think people were just also just genuinely wanted to like know, like hear what he had to say.
You reminded me of what I was going to say, but Sophia has something to say first, I think.
I kind of like what you said. Like, it's so wild that like some people didn't even want to believe it. Like, there were some people there who were like almost threatened by it. Like, you kind of saw those people, and it's like, it's not easy to follow these kind of principles, but it does seem like just kind of like basic life principles. Like, you should love everyone, you should give everyone a chance. But some people, including myself, get so like caught up in like my own pride and my own like wants and needs that I just kind of forget about people, like other people.
Kind of going off of what like Lexi said, like if we don't pay attention like during mass, like we can look it up in the Bible and like look up a recording of it, but like in that time there was no recording or like posting it anywhere. So I think that's like why they were so like shocked to it, and that's why like honestly sometimes I struggle to pay attention, because like I can go home, I can look in my Bible and just like see the readings and like look up a priest like just like describing it and look up a homily, but they didn't have that in their times. So that's like why I think they were so like invested in it and shocked by it.
I think they were also very eager to like be saved, and you see that with after hearing his reading about reconciling with your brothers, and if not you'll be liable to judgment, and then not seeing you. And then he also says, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye but not the log in your own? I feel like that whole kind of sermon like had to do with relationships with others, and they were so like eager to find a way to fix like issues they had with someone else. And you saw multiple of the characters after hearing that sermon actually act on it, because it's like the only fix they saw at that time.
Judas and Deborah, I thought that was like very moving, because we see how like invested Judas was in like this ministry, and how he like actually like believed, and how like he thought Jesus like was the Messiah and like he would defeat the Romans, but he kind of killed Jesus.
See, God wanted you to speak, because one of the things I didn't bring up yet was the interaction between Judas and Jesus. I mentioned that they talked in the summary, but some of the questions that I had was that, so when they spoke, Jesus said, we'll see how you do. I mean, Jesus knows the story. He knows what's going to happen. So it's hard to comprehend exactly how all that unfolded, but he still allows Judas to do all the things. Jesus doesn't always point at every single thing bad that everybody's doing. But my question, I guess, is what do you think about all this? Even like knowing that Jesus knows this, it's such a strange interaction, yet Jesus still calls him to follow him anyways. How did that make you feel?
I just think that like it says that Judas is going to follow like Jesus to the ends of the earth. And there was like, you could see it when you were watching it, like Judas had like so much excitement and like hope in his eyes, and he was like just ready for this journey with Jesus. And it's kind of sad because like we know what happens in the end, because like Judas like had all this hope and everything.
Yeah, it's neat to see his excitement, because I know when I first understood it, Judas, you think of like Benedict Arnold, the traitor, the evil person right from the start, but he was a friend for the longest. If you guys don't know who Benedict Arnold is in your U.S. history classes, maybe you need to go back and take that. He was a traitor for the country and turned his back on the American Revolution. No? Yes? All right, wonderful. Great. So anyways, I think it's easy for us to, once again, we look at Judas kind of as an enemy because his betrayal ultimately led to Jesus' death. And isn't that what we do with our enemies? We turn our back on them. At least that's what we seem to do. I don't think Jesus ever turned his back on Judas up until the very end. He gave him a chance. And ultimately allowed it because Jesus knew what was going to have to happen anyways. Do you have something, Leah?
I just think it's also cool because it goes straight off the teaching from the Sermon on the Mount. He's doing exactly what he taught, to love your enemies, even though he completely knew, like at the time Judas wasn't his enemy, but he knew in the future he would be. And he still lets Judas walk into this as like a teaching opportunity for him and for like everyone else, because he'll probably, I mean, we use that as an opportunity even now to this day, that Jesus said love your enemies, and he even knew that Judas was going to betray him, and he still let him into the group.
Do you remember what Jesus did when he was being nailed to the cross? He was asking God to forgive them, right? So, I mean, even the people who are literally in the middle of murdering him, he's saying forgive them. That is a hard thing to model. All right, Paige is ready.
I just want to say, like, kind of going off what Leah said, it is hard to love your enemies because, like, so many people have wronged us, and it's just hard to forgive them, especially if you try to forgive them and they just keep doing it to you. It's just really hard to completely forgive them and then them just stopping. But I feel like all of us have a hard time of all of us just have a hard time forgiving our enemies, even if they continue to wrong us.
Awesome. Thank you, Paige. Did anybody have anything else to add before I ask my last thing? Amory, go ahead.
I just thought it was like kind of cool to note that he accepted Judas like into his like religion and ministry with no hesitation. Like he obviously knew like how it would end up and that he would be the ultimate reason for his crucifixion, but it was also just the fact that he was just like, we'll see, but he didn't like say no, or it was just no hesitation, which I thought was really cool.
Awesome. Great point. The last scene, you don't really get the fallout of it yet, but the last scene was when Matthew returns home, and they always do this. They have some sort of thing right at the beginning, and they bring it in to the picture into the end as a way to pull on your heartstrings. But how did you feel in that last scene when Matthew is looking for a place to go? Remember, he didn't have a place to stay, and he goes back home, and you can tell he's like, I don't know if this is worth it. Hopefully dad's not home and mom's home, because mom will take me in. I don't know about dad. And if you didn't realize, that dog was with Matthew earlier in season 1. That was Matthew's dog, and when he chose to follow Jesus, he asked Gaius to take the dog to his parents' house. So that was a little bit of a reuniting with the dog. But how did you feel when he called him son?
It kind of reminded me of like the sacrament of reconciliation, because like it took a lot of humility for Matthew to go back home when he knew like what he did was not good. Like he did leave his family to become a tax collector. Like that wasn't the right thing to do, but he had humility, he had faith, and he went back. And that's kind of what the sacrament of reconciliation is all about, is like, I know I messed up, I have faith that there's a loving, forgiving God who wants me back. That's where I'm going to go.
And it's even like a direct comparison too, I think, because it is Matthew's father. And it's like we are the people in reconciliation that want that forgiveness from our parents. And Matthew came back and his dad was just like, son. Like, and that's so powerful because it's really what we want to happen with us when we go to reconciliation. And it is when we truly are sorry for our sins and are forgiven.
I think it really hits on the idea that trusting God's timing on soon, because obviously he wishes he had a relationship with his parents this entire time, but he stayed consistent and just really put himself out there, and it shows that God knows his plan and his timing will all work out in your favor.
Soon is always a word that comes up in this show because Jesus' idea of soon is much different than ours. So my last final point of what we were just talking about too, I think we need to give the dad props too, because his dad had anger, and by calling him son, he was also forgiving, but also I think and you'll see this in a later episode, I think, but he's also sort of saying, I should have never said you weren't my son. So it's like a mutual forgiving and a mutual of asking for forgiveness. So I think that's important. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, I think where we saw like Matthew's parents, they were mourning him because like they were gonna say that he was dead. Like they didn't want to think like they had a son anymore. And it's just like amazing that at the end, like Matthew's father could like overcome all of that anger and stuff. And it was just a very like all moment.
Absolutely. They find a way to pull on your heartstrings. And that's why telling the story in this way, even though not everything is biblical, like in case people don't realize, they have conversations with a Catholic priest and at least one, maybe two other Catholic denominations, along with a member of a Jewish rabbi, so that they can all kind of agree on what they think is okay in the show, which is kind of cool to see different Christian groups come together, or, in the Jewish case, a Jewish person coming in to try to make sure the history is accurate and what the Jewish people are doing and celebrating. So really awesome. Does anybody have any final points they want to make before we have like 2 minutes left? Awesome. Well, I can't thank you guys enough. You guys were fantastic. You talked way more than I realized. I thought it was going to be me saying most of it, but you guys were fantastic. So hopefully, if you listened to this and you enjoyed hearing from people your age as opposed to old farts like myself, if nothing else, I hope it encourages you to give the show a chance. I tell everybody the same thing. When you start it, it's going to be weird. It's going to be confusing. You're not going to know who's who in season 1. You're going to have to do some Googling, but that's why I love it, because it makes me research who these people are and what the story of Jesus actually was. So I thank you all for coming on, even though you were forced to by Miss Hensley. But I hope we can do this again. If you enjoyed this, we'll definitely do this again. So thank you all. Hold on. 3, 2, 1, clap. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the BBHS Seek and Find podcast. If you like what you heard, please like and share with a friend. Be sure to subscribe to all of our social media. You can follow us on Instagram and YouTube at BBHS.SeekandFind. You can also follow us on Facebook at Bishop Russer High School Seek and Find Ministry. Once again, thanks for listening, and may God bless you today.